The divorce contract. Lily and Thomas had been married for 5 years. Their relationship, once filled with love and excitement, had slowly become strained by the weight of daily life. The spark they once shared seemed to have faded, replaced by constant arguments and misunderstandings. They no longer laughed together, and conversations often turned into heated disagreements about money, household responsibilities, and even the smallest things, like who should take out the trash or walk the dog. Over time, the emotional distance between them grew. What was once a home filled with love became a place of silence and tension. It was as if they were living parallel lives, drifting further apart with each passing day. Finally, after yet another argument, Lily and Thomas made the difficult decision to get a divorce. It was not a decision they took lightly, but they believed it was the only way forward. They felt that too much had happened between them, and that the relationship they once cherished was beyond repair. The next morning, Lily sat at the kitchen table, staring down at the divorce papers. The neat stack of papers represented the end of their marriage, the final step in a process they had both agreed to. Thomas sat across from her, his face serious but calm. They had both agreed that this was the best thing for them, but now, sitting there with the papers in front of them, something felt wrong. Lily picked up the pen, her hand shaking slightly. She hesitated before putting it to the paper. "Well," she said, trying to sound casual, "I guess this is it." Thomas nodded, though he seemed just as uneasy. "Yeah, I guess so." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging between them. The quietness in the room was almost unbearable, and neither of them seemed to be able to move forward with the simple task of signing their names. Lily's mind began to wander. She thought about the early days of their relationship, their first date, how Thomas had made her laugh so much that she spilled her coffee all over the table. She remembered their wedding day, how nervous but happy they had been, standing hand in hand, promising to love each other forever. It all seemed so far away now, almost like it had happened to someone else. Thomas, too, found himself lost in thought. He thought about how excited they had been when they first moved into their house, how they had spent hours decorating, laughing, and imagining their future together. How had they ended up here, sitting across from each other, ready to end it all? As they both sat there, lost in their thoughts, Thomas finally broke the silence. "Do you remember our first road trip?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with a hint of nostalgia. Lily looked up, surprised by the question. She hadn't expected him to bring up the past. "Of course I do," she replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You got us lost for hours, and we ended up in that tiny town with the best pizza we'd ever had." Thomas chuckled, the sound breaking through the tension in the room. "Yeah, and we ended up staying the night in that quirky little bed and breakfast because it was too late to drive back. That was a great trip." Lily's smile grew, and for a moment, the anger and frustration between them seemed to melt away. "I remember how we talked for hours that night, just lying in bed, imagining all the places we wanted to visit together. They continued reminiscing, one memory leading to another. Times they had traveled, celebrated birthdays, stayed up late watching movies, and shared inside jokes that no one else could understand. The laughter, the joy, and the closeness they had once shared came flooding back. As they talked, both Lily and Thomas began to realize something important. They hadn't always been like this, angry, distant, and unhappy. There had been a time when they had truly loved and cared for each other, when their relationship had been full of happiness and hope. But somewhere along the way they had lost sight of that. Lily put the pen down, her eyes softening as she looked at Thomas. "What happened to us?" she asked quietly. "How did we get here?" Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I guess life just got in the way. Work, bills, stress. We stopped talking, really talking like we used to." Lily nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "Yeah, we let all those little things build up until they felt like huge problems. But we weren't always like this, were we?" "No," Thomas agreed. "We weren't." They sat in silence again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. One filled with reflection, not tension. For the first time in a long while, they were seeing each other not as opponents in an endless argument, but as the people they had once fallen in love with. Lily spoke up again, her voice tentative. "Do you think maybe we gave up too easily? Maybe we were so focused on the things that were going wrong that we forgot about all the things that were right?" Thomas looked at her, considering her words. Maybe we stopped trying when we should have fought harder to fix things." They both knew that their problems weren't small, and they couldn't just wave a magic wand to make everything better. But sitting there, reminiscing about the love they had once shared, they realized that maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth fighting for. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes meeting Lily's. What if we don't sign the papers? What if we try again? Really try this time?" Lily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to suggest that, but the thought of walking away from their marriage now, after remembering all the good times, suddenly felt impossible. She realized that deep down, she didn't want the divorce. She wanted them to find their way back to each other. "I'd like that," she whispered, "but we can't just ignore the problems we've had. We need to talk about them, really work through them." Thomas nodded. "I know, but maybe we've been focusing so much on what's wrong that we forgot about what's right. Maybe if we work together, we can find a way to make this work again." With that, Lily and Thomas put the divorce papers aside. They didn't tear them up, at least not yet, but they agreed to take some time to really work on their marriage. They promised to communicate openly, to listen to each other's concerns, and to remember the love that had brought them together in the first place. It wasn't easy at first. There were still disagreements, still moments of frustration, but this time, they approached their problems as a team, not as two people on opposite sides. Slowly, they began to rebuild their connection, one conversation, one shared moment at a time. They started spending more time together, taking walks, cooking dinner, and rediscovering the little things that had made their relationship special. They laughed more, talked more, and even argued more. But this time their arguments ended with understanding, not resentment. Months passed, and the divorce papers, still sitting in the drawer, gathered dust. One day, without saying a word, they both knew it was time to let go of them for good. With smiles on their faces and hope in their hearts, they tore up the papers together, symbolizing the new beginning they had created. Lily and Thomas had learned that love isn't about avoiding conflict, but about working through it. Their marriage, once on the brink of collapse, had been given a second chance. Not because they ignored their problems, but because they chose to face them together.
Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, and share our channel Magic Mingle with your friends to enjoy more magical stories.